I plan to stand, and I'm pretty tall, so I have to stand tall. Thank you for the invitation to come here, and it is a great pleasure. I was married in the chapel next door in St. Peter's about 30 years ago. I had my eldest son 9 months on the date thereafter, making Catholic family planning empirical reality. He is now a tank commander in the Norwegian army, so he has grown pretty big himself. Well, I deal a lot with security and defense issues. I'm also a professor at the Defense University of Norway. And that is, lo and behold, much, much easier than dealing with the struggles around the family politically. It is much more peaceful to deal with war and peace and rational strategic planning. But this, of course, is a much more important issue, even if we are a bit pestered by Putin for the time being, in the north of Europe at least. And I would like to discuss with you the political processes around family and marriage. And I'm very fortunate in coming from a sort of basic test case of how far things can go. In my country, we have the same statistics as Rabbi Sachs quoted. About 44% marriages end in divorce. Norway and Sweden are the most secularized countries on the planet. Very much influenced from Kinsey and from gender ideology. Very un-Catholic, anti-Catholic sometimes country. We are 1% Catholics. And also a country which experiments a lot with new forms of the family. So I have, in a way, a good place in which to glean the insights of trends. That's a new consultancy business, you know, trend analysis. So I would like to start by saying that it is, in fact, strange that we have to have such a conference as this on the family, on the natural complementarity of the sexes, on the fact that there are two sexes. Because this seems obvious, and this is rather obvious to a commonsensical person. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize that there are men and women around, and that this seems to be pretty natural. So why do we have to have such a conference, apart from the fact that it is jolly pleasant to meet so many of you, to have the conference as such? I think before 1994, about 1990, there was no discussion about what is a family, apart from theology, biology perhaps, those of particular interest in the subject, but there was no discussion of, is there such a thing as a family, and should that be recognized in legal and political terms by societies? Around that time, I was at my first family conference with the Vatican, and this was the Council for the Family with Cardinal Lopez Trujillo in Den Bosch in the Netherlands. During this conference, he made a statement about the family that amounted to something like this. Today, I and my dog are a family too, was a pun on the relativization of the family concept. And the media in the Netherlands reported this in the primetime news. The Cardinal today stated that he and his dachshund are a family too. So this was, you know, I don't think they were funny. I think they actually meant it. They just quoted verbatim. And since that time, we have had a great deal of relativization of the family. And it all started basically in 1994, the year of the family of the UN. That is when I started to notice changes in Norwegian politics, that the Labour government at the time spoke about various types of families, and that there is no such thing as the family, but there are families. Empirical reference points, not archetypes, not something that would be the norm. And I entitled my paper, The Family, the Natural Family as the Norm, because the battle is over, can it be, is it a norm for politics and society? This was also the year of the population conference in Rio, and the there are two issues that started to become very politicized from this time henceforth. The abortion issue, the right to abortion, development, condoms, this whole issue that the Nordic countries pushed very hard against the Vatican, against the Holy See, and then the family, concept of the family. And then we had the Women's Conference in Beijing the year after, where Marianne Glendon, Professor Glendon, myself, and Bishop Peter Elliott up here somewhere, the usual suspects, he's here, yes. We were together, and this is almost 20 years ago now. It's sort of a small moment of eternity, but 20 years. So at those conferences, these were the two recurring issues. The attempts to relativize, redefine these concepts and to get them into some kind of rights language, human rights language. And the Universal Declaration, on which Professor Glendon is the preeminent expert, has this very solid wording on the family, on marriage, in Article 18, and that's also true for the legally binding conventions of 1966. So in a way, human rights as conceived then and developed later was basically consistent with natural law. But by today, as we must regretfully say, as we've come down the road 20 years, there hasn't been much improvement, rather the opposite. Again, returning to my part of the countries here, the north, we've had semen donation as a health service paid for by the state since 1930. Was a way for students to make an extra buck. This has been legal in Norway, and it's still legal, but now the child ensuing has a right to know his father's identity when the child becomes 18. It's like a Brave New World construct. When you're 18, you can find the identity of your father. So this, the willingness to donate semen has then disappeared practically. Yet in Denmark, this is a commercial business. Norwegian single women and lesbian women go to Denmark to have this, to pay for this service. And we see this is just one aspect of a trade, of a marketplace that is very modern in the sense of being technologically possible, but also in the language of the market. It's an instrumentalization of the intimate natural act of begetting children, replacing it by the instrumental harsh realities of the market. A market where today a womb can be rented in the United States, in some states at least, in India, in some other countries. So there is by now a sort of constant flow of buyers, parents going to India or the United States if they can afford the US market to rent, to get an egg, to buy an egg, to get inseminated or to rent a womb. It's a modern form of slavery exploiting women, particularly in the developing world. But this is just a logical continuation of what is scientifically possible will be done if one has no moral or metaphysical or philosophical objections to it. But in a way, there is a paradox here, because even if this is the reality today, and globalization helps this tremendously, there is also the fact remaining that biology is not negated or replaced by this. Still, one needs an egg, one needs the semen, one needs the womb, one needs 9 months of pregnancy. Biological parenthood is the norm, despite these exceptions. But what we see is that the exceptions are threatening the norm. The rights language is inserted into this. I am a woman getting to be beyond 30. I have a right to have a child. We are a childless couple. We have a right to have a child. We're a gay couple. We have a right to have a child. So there is all the time this kind of rights language, a human right, then also the rights of the market there's a market for this. We are just selling and buying, like in the trafficking and prostitution market. So Western customers are now able to realize the dream child, order the designer baby. They look for the right quality of the semen donor. They look at the biographies of the Danish donors. There are no pictures of them, but how tall are they? Are they light-skinned? Are they blonde? And the same for the mothers, the egg mother. So this is Brave New World played out in front of us. And we also know that eugenics was some talk about World War II and German instrumentality, and I think we can say that this breeding business is really the elephant in the room. There is a surrogacy market today where customers do not want, probably not a black child, an Asian child, and not a Down's child, as we know from the Australian case that was publicized. And this is exactly what happens in the livestock market. One orders the right kind of semen, one orders exactly the qualities in the breeding. And this is something that we know there's a market for livestock, but this is exactly what one looks for. And a paradox here is that in that market, you look for exactly that animal. You want exactly those genetic qualities in your ox or in your horse or in your dog. So this is, we are just there's a line in water between the human market in this and the animal market in this. Now, what does this mean for politics and the law in a globalized world? Can we have national laws that prohibit this? In Norway, surrogacy is prohibited still. There's a heavy pressure to legalize it through these same legalization arguments as we had regarding abortion. It is done, therefore it must be legal. We can't criminalize the women. Now it is the children that are criminalized. We have these children coming to us from India or the US, and they have often one Norwegian parent. It is illegal to adopt this child because the mother or father is not known. Yet there is now a proviso to allow for adoption because the children mustn't suffer because of what their parents or the adults have done. So there is a gradual through the facts, we have to legalize this. And I don't think there's any possibility of any international convention ordering or imposing regulation on this. International law is a matter of state intergovernmental agreement among states, and states do not have to adhere to an international convention. So this is globalization in a way, fosters this kind of markets as well, the dark side of globalization. So we could say that here technology, like in so many cases, runs ahead. It's the same in the arms market. We have autonomous systems of weapons. How can we account for those? Who is responsible for the targeting in those weapons according to international law, which goes back, international law goes back to the UN Pact and to the Geneva Conventions. There is no quick fix. And I think there has to be major political engagement, argumentation in order to influence the trends here before we get any political decisions. And here the church is an expert in humanity, as Pope St. Paul II always, John Paul II always underlined. Who can speak about what a human person is today? Who has the argumentation? Who can present a philosophical argument like Sister Prudence did before the lunch break? Very few have this intellectual tradition and ability. So the church has a tremendous role potentially in this, because when we go further from this dehumanized human being, how can we argue? We can say biologically there are still the two sexes because there must be two sexes to generate a child, however technical the generation may have become. So this is a fact, undisputable fact. But the political debate then becomes, is this fact important at all? So today in the gender debate about mother, father, 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 mother, mother, caring persons versus parents, the argument is that yes, biology exists, but it isn't important. One can mimic it in the laboratory, and one cannot argue from the biological fact to the social, or should one say the cultural, social family fact. Caring ability is the defining characteristic of rearing children, not that you are a feminine and a masculine person, that you are so-called mother and father. So this is where the battle is, in a way. In Sweden, there are kindergartens now where it is impossible. One is not allowed to use female or masculine names for the children and not to refer to them as he or she. But there's a new word called hen. It's a han, hun, he, she, and the combination is hen. So that's the non-sex name. And they are not allowed to be dressed as girls or boys. They must have neutral clothes, and the toys are then, I don't know how they design the toys. This is a crazy experiment, a social experiment, but it is very much akin to a socialist, not socialist, perhaps communist idea of socializing completely the children from they are very small. As you know, in the Soviet Union, all children had to be in kindergarten. Was not a choice, it was a necessity. So this is the socialization. The sort of one starts by saying, yes, the biology cannot be denied, yet everything else is socially constructed. And here we have an ideological sort of family of socialism, communism, Marxism. Everything is a product of society, of the structures of society. There is no, the human being is a product of society, put rudely, and feminism, gender feminism. And we see a lot of this constructivism in my field, in the social science and political science. And the question is, in a way, how can one retain a natural law basis for human rights, at least, if not for law and politics in our societies? Because we have these strong movements that fatherhood and motherhood are socially constructed completely. This is that point of view that anything else is essentialism, called essentialism, a Herrschungstechnik, in a way. It is similar to a Hegelian dialectic, in a way. If I say I'm a mother and you're a father, then we mutually reinforce these social identities. But if I say that I'm a father and you also say you're a father, then we break the dialectic and we can overturn these identities. So identity is on a continuum. It is not a dichotomous variable, so to speak. So this is this process, which, of course, ideologically and politically, this ideology allows for the reconstruction of fatherhood, motherhood, man, woman, family, and it also allows further on for deconstructing what is called a heterosexual hegemony of society. The heterosexual norm is hegemonic, or the most powerful norm of society, but by redefining it, we, in a way, get rid of it, and we get then, presumably, some kind of total normlessness. So what is at stake is whether the family, the natural family, can be retained as the norm, not as the norm without exceptions, but as the norm with many exceptions. There will be many exceptions to this natural family, yet the norm is not negated or changed by the existence of the exceptions. And I think we here have the situation in the especially human rights field, where this is the struggle is really, it's not about rights on the surface of it, but it's about the premises for the discussion. We see this all the time in the or the starting point for the discussion or for the political statements is where the details, the devil is in the detail here, or the sort of the importance is in the detail. If one has this constructivist ideology deeply ingrained in the premises of the debate, there is no other conclusion but, in a way, total ability to deconstruct. If, however, one starts with biology and argues that there is empirically, it is empirically very, very clear, the evidence speaks to the fact that not only is male and female different from the beginning biologically, but also socially, culturally, in terms of personality. And we could have empirical tests of how children choose their toys. They will, most of them, the girls will mostly like the dolls. I never did, so I'm an exception, but it doesn't mean that I'm masculine. There's a great variety, diversion within masculine and feminine. But there will be certain patterns, and I think psychologists have found this many times. International politics today. In the 90s, we had the large UN World Conferences on almost every topic, resulting in soft law, which is not law proper, but sort of solidly arrived at, or shouldn't even say that, but political conclusions that seem to represent the whole world. So we had this for women, for the environment, population, climate, and so on. The UN today is in a much, much weaker position politically. It is in a major crisis. There are no such big conferences, although there are some follow-up conferences. But the UN is not really, it's a place where human rights have been compromised quite much through the UN Human Rights Council, which has had attempts to redefine freedom of religion, for instance, in quite blunt ways. So the UN is not the area, yet we have some international courts, notably the Human Rights Court here in Europe, which pronounces or gives judgments on all human rights. They have shied away from determining right to life and abortion issues, saying that this belongs to the national political arena. This is not a human rights issue. Well, of course, it should be a human rights issue, but that court has been very careful about controversial issues, although it did judge Italy on the crucifix issue, the Lauzi case a couple of years ago, but retreated in the higher chamber after a massive reaction. If you remember this case about crucifixes, how Finnish boys were seemingly intimidated by seeing a crucifix in the classroom, and Italy was then judged that it had to remove the crucifixes from the classrooms. And then the Grand Chamber, after this protest, voted in the opposite and correct direction, but also said this belongs to the national discretionary powers of every state, how to define religious freedom as long as minimum criteria are followed. And on the family, I don't think the court has really made major rulings yet. But the problem with the dilemma is really whether one should have supranational courts of human rights and supranational other instruments of human rights when we have this sort of almost relativistic way of judging. The court in Strasbourg calls its method evolutionary, that one takes political developments into account in pronouncing on human rights. which would mean that politics and human rights are pretty close. So there is certainly, for the time being, some debate about the Strasbourg Court, particularly from Britain, criticism from Britain, also from Italy in that one case. The zeitgeist of today is definitely much more constructivist than anything else. It is not a natural law kind of argument that we hear. The media and so on seem to work on a sort of model of progress. First we had a nuclear family, heterosexual, now we have new types of family, and now we have all sorts of family, and this is progress. We in the West, particularly Northern Europe and America, we are leading the way. But if we look at the essence of the legal arguments about human rights, they must, out of necessity, be natural law arguments. Because if we read the preamble to the Declaration of 48, it says these rights are inherent, they are inalienable, they are there because of their font is human dignity, your human dignity as a human being, not your government, etc. It is not something governments bestow, it is something governments must implement. They have the duty to observe human rights for their citizens. And this is the old problem we see now with Russia and particularly China, is the denial of human rights as a concept because of sovereignty concerns, pure power concerns. Norway is still in the doghouse regarding Liu Xiaobo, who got the Nobel Peace Prize 4 years ago. China has cut all connections with us, and we are the Prügelknabe of China still, because we gave this prize saying that this man has the freedom of expression as a human right. So this is a sort of classical sovereignty versus human rights. But the more difficult issue is when human rights are sought gradually redefined in these conferences or in the practice in the nations. Yet, if we look at the text itself and how it was interpreted when it was written in 48, how it is repeated in the 66 conventions and other conventions, also European one, we see that the family is solidly defined as a union of man and woman, and that it is defined as the basic cell of society, basic unit of society. So I wish I had a way of, in a way, finding a place or a method for really propaganda on this score, because there's a glaring difference between what is obviously a very solid case for natural law. The declaration came, after all, right after the Nuremberg verdicts, which stated that there's a higher law than positive law. Finding a way of conveying this, that human rights are a protection against arbitrary power, against state power, against it's a minimum protection for the individual. But of course, there are interest groups and media that are very much promoting the change of the family. The abortion issue has been left to the side completely in our countries for 30 years now, is not resurfacing, because then it leads to a massive uproar, a massive vilification of those who might want to discuss it. And the family issue has become equally stigmatizing almost, that you end up in court for discrimination if you say that there is a norm which is the natural family. It's something I experienced myself in 2006. So one has to be cleverer than the snake or whatever serpent in this work. But I think what one must do is to return to the discussion of, or the rights of the child. The child has a right to know its parents and grow up or be reared by its natural parents, according to the Children's Convention 7.1, and that's a key paragraph. So this is the norm there. and adoption and so on will be exceptions, and these exceptions have always been around and have been very good solutions to family problems. And then there must be the lived reality before everything else. Love grows the more we give it. This is the secret of the gospel. Families take enormous amounts of hardship, mature family life, and love is better with time, as with good wine. And there are truths, these are truths that can be communicated through example, and then one can accompany them by words. So I think this is where the church is of such great importance, that no other actor has the insight about this than what the Christian church possesses. That love is beyond selfishness, that it is a duty, it's a self-giving, and that it grows through self-giving. Counterfactual, or it seems paradoxical, but it's not counterfactual. So thank you very much for your attention. I shall sort of have to leave, unfortunately, very early, but I would have liked to stay on, and I hope perhaps to come to Philadelphia, and then I will stay on for longer than here. Thank you.